Hello there and welcome to the Quest 5 overview. Today we're going to talk about what we talked about last week, and we did talk about tables. So tables are important information that you can put into your HTML document and hold data. Now, we did talk about how tables previously were used for a while to make a layout within HTML documents into web pages, and that is not really how they're designed. We are absolutely not going to be doing that in this class. I just wanted to point out that if you come across some older websites, they might be built with tables. Do not follow that technique. There are much better ways to use CSS to do that. But let's go ahead and jump in and look at how tables work. So the very first thing I want to point your attention to is you don't always have to start from scratch anymore. Remember, I did give you the template, the framework, so that you can just jump in and start editing new tags without having to start from scratch. So if you would download that template from your email, you'll get a zip file. If you're in a PC, you're going to have to right-click and extract here, or if you're on a Mac, you can just double-click and it's going to spit out a folder. There we go. There's our folder. So I'm going to start by renaming it right away. So I'm going to go to this, and I'm just going to call it Tables. So once I got tables in there, I'm going to take a look at what I have in this folder. Now I got a few different documents within the folder. The only one I want to start with is this blank page, but I'm going to go ahead and just rename this one to Tables. So I'll put Tables in there. So we have an HTML file with the word tables on it. I'm going to right click on that file and I'm going to open with my Text Wrangler. Here we are in Text Wrangler in the blank file, or this tables file that I just renamed, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to remove everything that's in between those body tags. So you also notice that there is a style sheet in here, the styles.css. So we've already talked a little bit about CSS. We're going to get a lot more in depth in CSS in the coming lessons. But the idea here is that this HTML document is pointing itself towards a style.css document that's going to pull in some styles. So if I go here to the styles document, right click on it and open it with the Text Wrangler, you're going to see all those styles that I've already put in there for you. Now, we don't really have anything in regard to tables in this document, which is fine. So we're going to be able to add that extra style. Now, if you want to make it a little bit easier on yourself, you can just go ahead and Control-All or Command-All to select everything in this document and delete it out. It's not going to hurt it to delete everything out. We're just working with tables in this particular lesson. So I'm going to go ahead and clear everything out, and our style sheet is going to be blank. In our tables document, we are going to have this reference to that style sheet. Now, one thing that I did include for the framework is all this extra information just in case you were going to be looking at this in an older version of IE, which doesn't really play well with HTML5. So I had a little bit of JavaScript in here to create the elements in your IE. It's not necessary for this tutorial. I'm just going to go ahead and remove it so you don't see it. So now what you got is a pretty basic page. You got your doc type at the top, you start with your HTML tag, you got your head, and inside our head we have that blank page. We can go ahead right now and call that actually tables, and then we can go and take a look at our link to styles. So we've already looked at styles, we've already cleared that out, there's nothing in there yet. So once we start adding a little bit more of our CSS to that tables, then we can go in there in our style sheet and add it. Okay, so let's get started on tables. Let's jump right in between those two body tags and start with our first tag for table. So I'm going to tab out, make sure that you have this properly nested within the body tag, and I will put in table. That's the very first thing you need to put. I'm going to go ahead and close my table tag out right away because we definitely want to close our tags. And I'm going to put enter twice. That way we have our table set up. Now the very first thing that we're going to do is a very simple table, so you can see how a simple table is generated. Well, I'm going to go in between the table tags and we need to start putting in our rows. So tables in HTML are built out in rows. So usually the very first row in a table is kind of that heading row. And we'll talk about what that heading row is in a way to style it a little bit differently so that it actually bolds it out and makes it look like a table heading. For this particular one though, we are just going to put in this TR tag, which indicates table row. I am going to close it out right away, so we'll put the TR in there, and I will put an enter in there. So we have one row in our table. So this particular row can then hold different columns. So how do you do that? Well, we call it table data. That's a table data tag. So I'm going to tab out one more time, and I'm going to put a TD tag in there, and I'm going to close up that TD tag, and now we have one cell of data that is going to be in a column and in a row. So if you wanted to put a value to this, this would be the A1 row column, however you want to take a look at that. I'm going to go ahead and copy that TD, and I'm going to put it in here 3 more times. Okay, so what we can do is I'm going to start naming these with letters. So I'm going to put A, B, and C. All right, so we have 3 different columns, and it's all in one row at this point. So let's go take a look at what this looks like. So I'm going to file save this. We can actually render it in our browser. I'm going to change this viewpoint real quick so you don't see that extra files on the left. Now I'm going to jump down to my table files, and I'm just going to double click on my tables HTML, and let's see what it looks like. There we go, pretty simple. You see an A, B, C. Alright, that's not really indicative of a table quite yet. It might be a little difficult to understand it as a table, so let's get a little bit more in depth of how this might look. Okay, so back in our text wrangler, let's add another set of data. So I'm going to go in here, copy up our table row, and I'm going to go ahead and add another row just by putting another TR in there with those 3 inside. So let's go ahead and just do 1, 2, and 3 this time around. Okay. So once you do File, Save, minimize this guy, and I'm going to go ahead and click that tables HTML again, and there we go. We got ABC in that first row, we got 1, 2, 3 in that second row, and you can kind of see that these are columns now. So you got this first column, you got this second column, and you have a third column. So we're getting some basic information into a table. So one of the things that would be nice is to actually see this as a table. So let's put a little bit of styling in here so you can see all the borders and the different areas for this table. Okay, so let's go ahead and open our style sheet, right click on our styles, open a text wrangler, and now you'll be in a style sheet. So there's a few things that we can do to start showing some table borders and some cell borders and things like that. The very first thing I want to do is I want to adjust my table tag. So I'm going to say table, put that in there. You're going to put your curly brackets to say these are the things that we want to do to our table. The very first thing we want to do is put a border in there. So we'll type in border, and let's give it some sort of a value. So let's say it is going to be 1 pixel. It's going to be solid, and it is going to be the color value of, let's do black. So we'll put 0, 0, 0. All right, let's see if this is taking our style. So I'm going to file save this particular style sheet. Remember, this is the same style sheet that's linked into that HTML file that we're working on. So now if we take a look at our tables, we have a border around our table. Awesome. Okay, so we could probably do a little bit better and put some borders around each individual cell. So I'm going to go back into my style sheet here. I'm going to edit that again with Text Wrangler. And this time, we could create a whole brand new rule. We could actually just copy this one out. So I'll go ahead and copy it. And I will paste that rule in there. And instead of table this time, we want to adjust our TD. So we're going to give it the same kind of value, but this time we're going to give it a little bit lighter of a color around the border. So I'm going to put CCC, which indicates more of a gray kind of color. So I'll go File, Save, and let's take a look at what this looks like in our tables now. Okay, so we're able to see it. You see little borders around each cell. You see one big border around the entire table. It's starting to look like some table data. Okay, so we have a really simple table here. You'll notice that we have the stylings for the little gray cells in there. We also have a border for the entire table. Let's get a little bit more complex and start using this and making it look a little bit better like a table. So I'm going to go back into the HTML. I'm going to go to my tables HTML document, right click it, open with Text Wrangler. Let's get a little bit more in depth on how this table looks. Now, typically when you have a table, and if we're going to think of terms of like a spreadsheet, you usually have the very first row as your information so you can get down to the data that you'd like in your cell. So let's say they were all letters on the top if we're thinking kind of like in Excel terms, and maybe on that first column it would be all numbers. So let's set this up to look similar to something that you'd see in Excel. Now, the very first thing I'm going to do is I want to actually change this first row of data so that it actually has TH in the title now instead of a TD. But TH says it's a table heading, and that's going to style it just a tad bit differently, and you'll see that in just a second. And now, since this is our very first row of our document, we might want to give it some names like A, B, or C. Now, one thing that you would have an issue with is this is the absolute first cell in your entire document. And if you think about rows and columns and the way that you would think about an Excel document, the absolute very first upper corner cell is not going to have anything in it. So we'd actually want to leave that one blank. And this would be considered our A, and then this one can be considered our B. Okay, this is going to make a little bit more sense once we take a rendering of this and see what it looks like. So if we go down to our next row, let's start thinking about the data that you'd have in there. That very first column that you'd have would be also a heading. So I'm going to turn this one into a heading. And that first heading might be a number. So I'm going to put in 1. All right, so then the next cell to the right of that one would be our A1. Okay, so let's just call it A1. And then if we go to the next column, it would be on the 1 row, but it would be now in the B column. So this one would be B1. All right, so next we'd go down to our next line. This is again our next row in our sequence here. And this next row, the very first one always has to be that TH, because remember we're going to be doing this as a table heading for this particular row. And this time I'm going to go ahead and put A2 in there. So the next thing you'd have is A2. Then you'd have B2. All right, let's go check and see what this looks like. It's going to be a little bit better on the other side when you start seeing how this renders out. So I'll save this particular table, and I'll render my table. And what do we have but a little table that somewhat looks like something you'd see in Excel? You'll notice that these THs do not have styling around them. That's why you're not seeing any kind of border around those particular cells, but you get the point. So this is the table heading. The reason that we put the TH around there, it's going to put it bold. It's going to be a different kind of tag, so it says, hey, this is a heading for this particular, this is actually a whole row of table headings, and this is going to be one column in our table rows that we're going to be putting those table headings on. So I think it should be making a little bit more sense right now. You can see how this works. There's actually a little table cell that's sitting right here. That's that one that we left blank. If you go ahead and look right back at that, that's this one right here. Just to prove that to you, I'll go ahead and put hello right in there, and then we'll save this out. And once we go back to our document and refresh it, you should see hello pop in there. So I suppose you could use that for some sort of title, but there is also a title that you can use for tables. So I'll go ahead and point that out right now. So usually at the top of a table, you'd want to put some sort of title, not right in that first cell there. So what you can use is called the caption tag. So if you put caption, and then of course you got to close that one out, you can put table heading. This might just be the overall title of your document or your table. So we'll call this title of table to be real nice here. Okay, so once we file save that and we refresh, you're going to see the title of the table that sits above it, and then everything else below is going to start fitting into that table. Okay, so I think you're getting the point on how to build a table. I wanted to point out 2 quick other concepts that we can use in tables in HTML. Everything else, the real granular details, go take a look at it in your chapter 8 of your book. That's on page 133. So here we go, the last little lesson that you're going to want to look at when using cells and different data in your HTML. Okay, so going back into Text Wrangler here, I'm going to go ahead and add one more column to each of these areas. So I'm going to add another column header. This one I'm going to call C. And then I need to add an extra area to all these rows down here. So I will put this one would be C1. And then I have to put one more down here, and this would be C2. Let's just take a quick idea as to what this looks like. So I saved it up, go back into this document. All right, we got a little bit more. Let's say we wanted something to span 2 rows. Say this particular A1, you want to actually be these 2 rows. Well, there's a quick and easy way to do that. What you do is you'll jump back into your Text Wrangler file. Okay, so what you're going to want to do is you want to put row span equals, and this one we said we wanted to do 2, so we'll put in 2. Now what we need to do is we need to actually remove this one because they're going to span over it, so we don't even need it there. So if I hit delete, and I'll go ahead and hit save, go back into our document, and we're going to refresh, and you'll notice now the A1 spans over both of those. So the next thing that we need to do is, let's take a look at how you can column span. Let's say we take B1 and we put it across to C1. All right, pretty easy. What we need to do is go into our text wrangler here, and we want to take this B1 and we want to span it across rows. So what we would do here, we'd want to span it across the columns. So we want to put col span equals, and this time I'm going to put 2. So can you guess which one I'm going to have to remove from this one? That's right, we're going to have to remove this particular one so that you can actually span to the next column, because remember, this is a column span. And each one of these different TDs is going to span across a column. So if I went ahead and saved that out, and I did a refresh, you're going to notice that it spans across the columns. So you got some real good basic starter information of how to utilize tables in HTML. There's a lot more you can do with it. Like I mentioned multiple times, the book is going to get into more granular detail of every little thing that you need to do, but this is a good start to learning how to use tables in HTML. Thanks. Peace. Desktop, there's our tables folder. Oh, open the whole folder, open text document.